Okay, today's daf we're going to be learning Zevachim daf Kufaf. Reminding everyone that registration for the Siyum is open, and I hope to see you all there. And that's on January 11th, Sunday. And which, by the way, is going to be, it's a day early, which we often do. So whoever comes to the Siyum wants to finish, so you'll learn the daf in the morning and then come to the Siyum in the evening or whatever time of day it is by you. And then Monday there'll be no regular class. And always good time to start learning the introduction to Menachot. And also as introduction to Menachot, we opened the registration yesterday, so it's open. A bunch of the spots are filled, but there's still a few spots left. So if you'd like to join the workshop on Menachot, you're all invited to join. Details were sent out in the groups and by email. So it's actually not sitting on the website in any place. So if you can't find it and you're looking for the registration, just write to us by email. info@hadran.org.il. Okay, let's get started. So we're learning Daf Kuvav. We're going to finish the 12th chapter today, and we're going to move on to the new chapter. We finished yesterday with a Braita that was trying to explain this. Well, we started with the opinion of the rabbis, but they have a machloket with Rabbi Shimon, and we're going to start with Rabbi Shimon today. In the Torah, it says the one who burns we're talking about the parim and the sirim and israfim, again, the ones on Yom Kippur, the ones for the mistaken erroneous rulings people follow. So those bulls and goats get burned outside, and the one who burns them outside the three machanot, meaning outside Jerusalem, right, what was Jerusalem in those days, becomes impure. But the rabbis said, and we finished yesterday with where's their proof. After proving that it needs to be outside three camps, I actually didn't finish my sentence. Where's their proof that it's not just the one who burns it, but as soon as they leave the first machaneh, they leave the azara, they're already impure. And once you go outside of that space, they already become impure, not once they get to the three machanot. It's way before that. Whereas Rabbi Shimon disagrees. And then we finished with three machanot we proved from the psukim about the parlim dever shel tzibur and the par kohen Mashiach. There's a bunch of unnecessary, and we went through those drashot. But then, if you remember, we learned a long time ago that the par that's mentioned in Vayikra Daled in the section of the parlim dever shel tzibur and the par kohen Mashiach actually is also referencing the par of Yom Kippur. So we already know from that whole gezeira shava connection there that there were different ways of learning the connection, but everyone agrees that what's true for those is true for those. So when all of a sudden in Yom Kippur it mentions going outside of one of the camps, it's really not necessary, right? Taking the bull outside one of the camps, it's not necessary. So it must be there to teach you this other halacha that once you leave one camp, you're already impure. Now, Rabbi Shimon obviously doesn't hold that way. So that's where we're going to start today. Rabbi Shimon, in my Gemara, it's 5 lines from the bottom, on Daf Kuf Hamid Bet. Rabbi Shimon, Hai michutz lamachaneh ma'avile. So what does he do with that, michutz lamachaneh? So the answer, mebai lelachititani. He needs it for what we're going to see in a Braita. And basically, Rabbi Shimon must hold like Rabbi Eliezer, because Rabbi Eliezer says, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, ne'amar kan chutz lamachaneh, v'ne'amar lahalan chutz lamachaneh. Okay, in simple terms, he's going to use this for gezeira shava between the par in Yom Kippur and the para aduma. Okay, the red heifer. We're going to learn now, gezeira shava often works both directions. So we're going to learn one thing from Yom Kippur to the para aduma, and one thing from the para aduma to Yom Kippur. Now we already know that for the par in Yom Kippur, which we learned yesterday, and I just reviewed it, you have to take it outside three machanot. So we're going to say, Mala halan chutz l'shalosh makamot, just like on Yom Kippur, it's outside three camps. Avkan chutz l'shalosh makamot. Also, the para aduma has to be taken outside three camps. Mala halan lemizracha shel Yerushalayim. Now with para aduma, we know it says you have to do it in the east part of Jerusalem. Okay, that's because, why is that? Because the pasuk says you're supposed to do it al nochach pnei ohel moed. You're supposed to be able to see into the entrance of ohel moed. Right? Every time you look at the map, remember the entrance is always on the east, right? And the Kodesh Kodeshim is on the west. So it has to be opposite the entrance. So it has to be in the direction of the east. And they would do it on Har HaZeitim, on the Mount of Olives. Afkan the Mizracha shel Yerushalayim. So also, now we're going to learn, that's the other direction of the gezeira shava, that the parim and israfim, where outside Jerusalem do we do it? On the east. We're going to see in a minute, there's a machloket about this. Ela, and that's exactly the next question. According to the rabbis, the Rabbanan, who don't have this gezeira shava, because they use mechutz lamachaneh to teach that as soon as you leave one camp, you're impure, and they don't have this gezeira shava here. Where do they burn it? Kidditanya, like it says in the following braita. Again, we're going to bring a braita and say, oh, this much matches the rabbi's opinion. Hechanis Rafin, Litzfon Yerushalayim chutz l'shalosh machanot. To the north of Jerusalem, outside 3 camps. Why to the north? So Rashi helps us. Rashi tells us, Shekol ma'aseh chata b'tzafon. Okay, let's go back to Ezu Mukoman Shel Zevachim, chapter 5. Where did you do all the Zevachim? Remember? The chatat, right? These are all chatat offerings. And the chatat, the shchitatam b'tzafon, they're slaughtered in the north. You accept the blood in the north. Remember, all that's in the north. So, since the main things of the chatat are done in the north, we're going to assume that when we go outside Jerusalem to do it, we must go in the direction of the north as well. That's the default. And if you don't have the gezeira shava, which teaches you from the aduma to the east, then it must be to the north. Rabbi Yosei HaGelili Omer. Now this seems to be a machloket here, even though Rabbi Yosei HaGelili's right. We brought this braita to say where do the rabbis think we burn it. Now Rabbi Yosei HaGelili isn't exactly talking about location; he's talking about something else. It's not clear exactly that they argue, but maybe they do. And the Gemara is going to think maybe they do, but not about where to do it. About Rabbi Yosei HaGelili's point, Rashi is going to say since Tanna Kama didn't say this, and only Rabbi Yosei came and said it, Rabbi Yosei HaGelili, it must be there's a machloket about it. So it must be the rabbis don't think that this is the case, but the rabbis here say, Rabbi Yosei HaGelili says, a Beit HaDeshen nisrafim. They're burned in the Beit HaDeshen. Now you might think, oh, they're talking about location here, but they're not. What they're saying here is, they do it in the Beit HaDeshen, meaning, what is Deshen? Deshen is ashes. It means you put, Rashi explains here, Sarich she'yakidim l'sham deshen mizbech. You have to take Deshen, ashes from the altar, put it on here first before you burn it. Okay, why? Sheheni kach kodem lachen. I'm still in Rashi. So before you get there, it's good. Before you get there to burn it, it's called mekom shefach hadeshen, because that's what the pasuk says. It says makom shefach hadeshen. Okay, where the deshen, what shefach spilled, where the deshen is poured. Okay, so it means that you have to pour ashes there first from the mizbech before you burn it. Now. And then Rashi just adds what I told you before, it sounds like the rabbis don't require this because they added here Rabbi Yosei HaGelili as if he's arguing with the rabbis. And he's certainly not arguing about where it was because that's not what he's talking about. I'm a Rava, so therefore Rava says, Man tanna de palagalei Rabbi Yosei HaGelili. Who's the one who disagreed with Rabbi Yosei HaGelili about this? They're going to bring a braita and try to prove, oh, here you see. Abai is going to say it's not so clear that there's a disagreement about this topic. But let's just read it. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, they say the one who argues with Rabbi Yosei HaGelili, this who we're assuming we read into, it's the rabbi's position in the braita that we just read, that they don't require deshen to be there, must be Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Why? Tanya says in a braita, and now we're going to darshan that pasuk I mentioned, al shefech hadeshen yisaref. It's supposed to be burnt on. Now, what do we think shefech hadeshen meant? According to Rabbi Yosei HaGelili, it meant pour deshen there first, pour ashes from the altar there, and that's exactly what it says in Tanna Kama here. Shehei sham deshen, she'akdim l'sham deshen, that there'll be deshen there, that you bring the deshen there first. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov omer, shehei mekomo meshupach. He says, what is shefech hadeshen? Now, you pour, things are angled often. What the shefech means, a place where you can pour and it'll be angled down, a sloped area. Okay? So the area has to be sloped so that when you have the ashes there, the ashes kind of go downward. Okay, because otherwise you're going to end up with heaping piles of ashes. We want them to just kind of fall down. So that's what he says. So now they're assuming that because he darshans shefech hadeshen doesn't mean a place where you pour ashes. It means where the ashes can pour down because it's sloped. So he must be the one who disagrees, and he's the one who matches the rabbi's position, who said it's chutz shalosh machanot in the north of Jerusalem, doesn't say you need to put the ashes there. That must be him. But Amar le Abai, as I told you, Abai is going to say they don't necessarily disagree about that. Dilma bimkomo meshupach pligi. It could be that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov also thinks that you need to have a pile of ashes there. And what he disagrees about is he says, but also it needs to be sloped. And the Tanna Kama just doesn't think it needs to be sloped. But it doesn't necessarily mean he argues about whether there needs to be ashes there or not. So it's not so clear that he's the one who disagrees. And I have to be honest, it's not even so clear if the rabbis disagree with Rabbi Yosei HaGelili in the first place, right? It never said they disagree. It just said he says this, they say that. maybe unclear. I mean, the Gemara does seem to think that, and Rashi says it, but could be a possibility that maybe no one disagrees. Okay, Tanu Rabanan. Last braita for today, in this last braita of this chapter, and then we'll move on to a new topic. Hasoref mitamei begadim, v'lo hamitzita ta'or mitamei begadim, v'lo hamasadera tamaracha mitamei begadim. So the one who burns it, as we know, becomes impure. We also learned the one who leaves the temple carrying the animal, but Rashi says here, we're obviously talking within Rabbi Shimon, who thinks it's really only the one who burns. And therefore, we're going to say it doesn't include other people who got in earlier on the scene, like the one who made the fire on the pyre there, or not the one who's misaderet hamaracha, who set up the logs there. Okay, all those people come in before the burning, so they don't become impure. Only once the burning starts. So Rashi says, obviously, this tanna holds by Rabbi Shimon, who holds it's only the burning. Now, what does it mean, the person who burns it? Who's included in that? The one who helps during the burning, like, let's say, moves the coals around, stokes the coals, flips the animal to help it burn. Okay, anyone who's involved, puts the animal on the fire. Anyone who's involved in that stage is impure. Now we've discussed, machloket, about when it starts. Now the question is, when does it end? At what point are you dealing with it and you're no longer going to be impure? So what's the end point? Yachol af mishnasu efel mitami begadim. We're still in this braita. You might have thought, once it turns to ash, maybe it still makes you impure. Again, the way they say it makes you impure, they use the language of the Torah. Yechabes badav, right? V'rachatz b'mayim, right? Meaning you become impure, and therefore what you're wearing becomes impure. Or again, we talked about this before. Maybe even things you touch become impure. But anyway, that's why they use this language, mitamim begadim. But you might have thought, once it's ashes, maybe you also become impure. Talmud Lomar, like let's say the one who cleans up the ashes. Talmud Lomar, otam. Okay, the pasuk says hasoref otam. What are otam? The animals. When they're no longer animals and they're ashes, that's not included. They have to be called animals still, and that is until such point that they become ash. Umishanasim efer emitamim. Okay, emitamim begadim. But Rabbi Shimon disagrees. Even though we said the Tanna Kama holds like Rabbi Shimon, he holds like Rabbi Shimon in terms of it only starts at the burning, but he disagrees with Rabbi Shimon on one point. Rabbi Shimon omer, otam etamim begadim, but nitach habasal em etamim begadim. Okay, nitach habasal seems to be once it starts to liquefy a little the meat and soften and not really look like a form of meat. So that's obviously an earlier stage. Okay, nitach habasar ein mitamei begadim. So they're mitamei begadim, but once nitach habasar, it starts to melt and turn into like a loose kind of substance. It's not mitamei begadim. My benai. What's the difference between them? Amarav ika benai deshavia charucha. Okay, Rashi says that's nitach habasar, but not yet ashes. Okay, so there's some earlier stage where Rabbi Shimon says already then it's not even considered an animal anymore, and it wouldn't even be mitamei begadim. So it's just the main part of the burning before it actually starts changing form. But, it's still not ashes yet. And the other opinion says, no, only once it's ashes does it not make the person impure. And with that, Hadran alach Tvul Yom. Finish the chapter of Tvul Yom. We're turning to chapter 13. Okay, so now we're going to talk about a topic, and I want to read the psukim with you first because it's very important to understand them for the basis of our daf today. We're going to talk about two topics that are somewhat connected. It's called shchutei chutz and ha'ala'at chutz. We all know that when there's a temple, you're not allowed, right? There was something called bamot, which is before there was a central temple. You could bring things outside the temple, sacrifices. We've made mention of it a lot in our Masechet. But once there's a temple, you cannot bring anything outside. And if you either shochet b'chutz, slaughter the animal outside, this doesn't mean slaughtering any animal, this means slaughtering an animal that was designated for sacrifice. If you slaughter it outside, you get karet. We're going to see in the psukim in a minute. If you offer it on an altar outside, that's called ha'ala'ah, to offer it up, meaning send it up to God, burn it on an altar. Outside the temple, also, you're going to get karet. Okay, these are two very serious averot. If you do them unwittingly, you didn't know it was forbidden, or you didn't realize you were outside, or whatever it might be, so you have to bring a korban chatat. Okay, so I'm going to read you the psukim, because this is going to be the basis. What we're mainly going to do today is we're going to look for, in order to get punished, okay, now, Karet is something God administers, so we don't need to worry about that. But if the court wants to institute a punishment, which in this case would be if you did it accidentally, unwittingly, you didn't realize, then you would have to bring a sin offering. Now, how can they require you to bring a sin offering? In order to do that, there needs to be, this is a general rule, we've seen this in a lot of cases, you need a warning pasuk that says you cannot do this, and you need a punishment pasuk, what the punishment is. Without a warning pasuk and a punishment, we can't punish you. Okay, it has to say, what's the punishment? Okay, in a regular lota say the punishment is just lashes. You don't really need a punishment pasuk for it. But if it's punishment other than lashes, then you need not only a pasuk that says you're going to get karet, which basically is translated as, but if you did it unwittingly, you're going to bring a sin offering. But you also need a place where it says, don't do this, with a language of a lota, say, of a negative prohibition. So we're going to have to find that in these psukim, and that's why I'm going to read you the psukim, and I want you to pay attention. There's two sections here, and they come one right after the other. One is talking about slaughtering, and one is talking about offering it. We're in Vayikra chapter 17, okay, verse 1. Okay, okay, God spoke to Moshe. That was pasuk 1. Daber el Aharon ve'el banav ve'el kol bnei Israel. Okay, so Aaron, his sons, all of the Jews. Va'amarta alehem, and say to them, Zeh hadavar asher tziva Hashem lemor. Okay, so far we haven't said much. This is what God commanded. Ish mi bei Israel asher yishchat shul o kesef o ez b'machaneh o asher yishchat b'chutz l'machaneh. So if you have a person who slaughters a shor, kesef and ez, it never really says the korban, but it's obvious it was a korban, and they slaughter it, okay, either in the camp, out of the camp. Ve'el petach, here comes the key pasuk dalid, okay, this is a very central pasuk. El petach oel moed lo hevi'o, and he didn't bring it to the oel moed, which is the azara basically, lahakriv korban laHashem, lifnei mishkan Hashem, to bring it as a sacrifice to God before the mishkan, the place where God dwells. You ready for the harshness of this? Dam yechashev la'ishahu dam shafach. You spill blood unnecessarily. It's like you kill this animal for no reason at all, okay? Because you messed up. V'nichurat ha'ishahu mikerav abo, and you will get karet. That's for slaughtering it outside. Now we could have stopped here and moved on to hala'ah, but there's a few more psukim here, and we're going to have to figure out what these are doing. Later we're going to actually see that some hold that this is its own separate section, okay, talking about some nuanced case within this. Okay, that's going to be at least one opinion we're going to see. למען אשר יביאו בני ישראל את צווחיהם אשר הם זובחים על פני השדה, והביאום להשם על פתח אוהל מועד על הכהן, וזבחו זבחי שלמים להשם אותם. This sounds like it's giving the reason for this halacha, so it doesn't sound like it's a new thing. But in order that the Jews will bring their sacrifices that they're bringing outside, okay, they should bring them to God inside, okay, and they should bring korbanot to God. And then the Kohen should sprinkle the blood on the altar of God. Petach Ol Moed, right opposite the exit of Ol Moed, which here the Ol Moed is really the sanctuary. And then he should burn the chelev on the altar. That's the fatty parts that we burn on the altar. Now here comes the clincher pasuk. Now seirim are usually idols. Okay, what's that have to do with idols? Good question. Okay, and people should no longer be offering sacrifices to idols, that they're zonim acharehem, right? We know that language like a zonah, like a prostitute. People are, biting after these idols. Chukat olam tiyezot lahem l'dorotam. It sounds like what they're saying is, shchutei chutz, like the slaughtering things inside the temple is the complete opposite to the hefkerut, as we say, the just people offering idols, sacrifices all over the place, like apnei sadeh, and just offering them wherever they want. We have a place, we do it in the temple, and they're to God. Okay? So that's the section. And it sounds like it's all one topic, and that's all about shchutei chutz. Now, I don't know if you caught any, so we have the punishment, karet, it says. Did you catch a lo taseh? So the only negative commandment there, really, negative languages, which it's a good question whether it's even a negative commandment. V'lo yizbechu oret zivcheihem l'seirim. Seems to be, don't bring your sacrifice, don't slaughter your animals for idols. Slaughtering them outside isn't necessarily that you did it for idols, so it's a little tricky. That pasuk is talking about idols, it's talking about slaughtering them outside. And not only that, but you can even read that pasuk as, and if you do them all inside, then you won't be doing all this. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a lo taseh. Don't do that. But we're going to talk about that pasuk a lot today. Now we go to section 2. Section 2 starts with verse 8. Next pasuk. Va'alehem tomal, to them say, okay, which is a strange language, we're going to dash on this tomorrow. Ish ish mi beit Yisrael min hager asher yagor b'tuchan, okay, anyone who lives in Jewish people, or the converts that are living among you, asher ya'aleh olav zevach, here you have ya'aleh, who will offer in olav zevach, ve'al petach ol moed lo yivienu, and won't bring it to the entrance of ol moed, la'asot oto la'Hashem, to make it for God, v'nichrat ha'isha hu me'amav. Okay, there you have it. There you get karet. Okay, so you have a punishment, no warning. Okay, now we're going to go to the Mishna, and then we'll get to the Gemara, where they immediately start on where's the warning and the punishment for both of these cases. But first we have a machloket in the Mishnah. The first tanna says, "Hashochet v'hama'aleh b'chutz." Let's say you slaughter it outside and you offer it up outside. So how many chatats do you need to bring? Let's say you didn't realize you were outside, or you didn't realize it was forbidden at all, and you did them both, what we call behelem echad, in one mistaken action, but you did two actions because you slaughtered it outside and you offered it outside. So according to Tanna Kama, chayav ala shchita v'chayav ala la'ah. You're actually liable for both, and you have to bring two sin offerings. This reminds us of Masechet Shabbat, where you do two, right? You forgot it was Shabbat, and you did this malacha and you did that malacha, right? They're two completely different actions. You're chayav on each. Rabbi Yosei HaGelili omer, shachat bifnim ve'ela b'chutz chayav. If you slaughtered an animal inside, which is what you're supposed to do, and then you offered it outside, you're going to be liable. But shachat b'chutz ve'ela b'chutz patur. But he says, what are you talking about? You're chayav too if you slaughter outside and offer it up outside. He says, think about it. If I slaughter it outside, I've already disqualified the korban. So what I've offered outside, when I offer it up on the altar, I've offered up a disqualified korban. Why should I be liable for that? He assumes when it says offering up something outside, we're talking about offering up something that was completely valid. This was already disqualified because you slaughtered it outside. So you can't be liable too for that. You're either liable for slaughtering outside, or if you slaughtered it inside and offered it outside, then you'll be liable for offering it outside. But you won't be liable for offering something outside that was completely disqualified already. Shelo ha'ela davar pasul, because you offered up something that was disqualified. What's the idea here? Don't offer up something that was supposed to be offered inside. Now, if you slaughtered it outside, you can't offer it inside, so then you're not liable for outside. Amrulo, the rabbi said to him, they have a very good retort to him. Says, according to your logic, even if you slaughtered it inside and offered it outside, you'd be offering up something disqualified. Why? Because the moment you take that sacrifice outside that animal that was slaughtered outside the azara, remember, that's a disqualification of psul yotze. Once you take it out of the azara, you can't offer it on the altar anymore. So there won't ever be a case of hala b'chutz if that's your theory. If you say once something's disqualified and you offer it up outside, you're not liable, then you'll be liable for nothing for hala b'chutz, and that obviously can't be because there's a pasuk in the Torah that says you're going to get karet for it. So basically the rabbis on that basis disagree with Rabbi Yosei HaGelili. And now we're going to have the same kind of machloket in a different case. Hatameh she'achal. If you're impure, you can't eat sacrificial meat. Or if you're pure, you can't eat sacrificial meat that was impure, right? Meat could be impure or you could be impure. So what if, now you can see where it's going, a tameh, an impure person that ate bein kodesh tameh, whether the kodshim, the sacrificial meat, was disqualified, or bein kodesh tahor, whether it wasn't disqualified, okay, whether it itself was impure or it wasn't impure. Either which way, you can't eat it, and if you eat it, you're going to be liable. Now, I'm going to see this in a minute in the Mishnah, but I'll tell you already, you only get karet if you are impure and you eat sacrificial items. And what the Tanna Kama is saying is you're going to get that karet whether they were pure or impure. If you are pure and you eat impure sacrificial items, it's forbidden, but you don't get karet for it. So anyway, if you eat whether it's tameh or whether it's not, you're chayav. Rabbi Yosei HaGelili omer, as you can expect, tameh shachal tahor chayav. If you're impure and you eat pure sacrificial meat that's not disqualified, you're chayav. But tameh shachal tameh patur. Shelo achal ela davar tameh. You only ate something impure that was already ruined. So you're not going to get karet for that. Amrulo, they said to him, again we're going to have the retort of Chachamim, Af tameh shachal tahor. If I'm impure and I eat pure sacrificial items, what generally happens when I go eat? Okay, what do? First I pick up the food, right? as soon as I pick up the food to eat it, kevan shenagabo tim'uhu, I already made it impure. So every single case, or almost every, right? Maybe I could eat like this, put my head down and eat it without touching it. But the majority of cases of an impure person eating pure food, or eating any sacrificial items, as soon as they touch them, they're going to make them impure because they're impure, and therefore everything they eat is going to be already disqualified. So there you see, and then there'd never be a case, according to you, Rabbi Yosei HaGelili, where you'd actually be liable. And now the last line of the Mishna, which is what I told you before, tahor she'achal tamei patur she'eno chayav el al tumat haguf. If you're tahor and you eat impure food, you don't bring a korban chatat because there's no karet. Remember, korban chatat always goes with, if you're chayav karet, if you did it intentionally, then unwittingly you're going to be chayav chatat. But a pure person who eats impure food doesn't get karet. Only tumat haguf, only if the person's impure and they eat the sacrificial item. Okay, now we're going to get to what I said the main discussion is going to be about, and this will take us to the end of today's daf and even a bit into tomorrow's daf. Bishlama he'elah, k'tiv onesh, u'k'tiv azhara. He'elah is actually simple. We don't really have any difficulty here. We have an onesh and we have an azhara. That's what we're going to be looking for. Punishment and warning. Warning means a lo taseh somewhere. Onesh t'chtiv al petach mo'ed lo yivienu, and then it says you get karet. We read that pasuk before, and that it says we're in the latter section in hala'at chutz. It says you get karet. Azhara, where does the azhara? Now there was no negative prohibition there. Well, for that we have to go to Devarim chapter 12. In Devarim chapter 12, what I mentioned before is this is talking about sacrifices. Now in Devarim chapter 12 it says, bring your sacrifices to the temple. But if you want to eat meat regular, it's this big thing called basar tava, which we take for granted, that if we want we can eat meat. Obviously not for those who are vegetarian, but if you want to eat meat and not bring it as a sacrifice, okay, because remember, people often brought shlamim to the temple, and then they would eat the meat. So, you could bring a sacrifice, but you could also just, I'm living in my house in Haifa, and I want to have some meat, I don't have to go to the temple and offer a sacrifice, you can also just slaughter the animal. Okay, but before that, it sets it up as, you bring your sacrifices to God, and then there's cases where, and you can eat your meat, but then there's cases where you just want to eat and you have the temple and you want to just sacrifice. But the pasuk there, when it's talking about going to the temple, says, Hishamer lecha, in Devarim chapter 12, verse 13, Hishamer lecha pen ta'aleh ulotecha b'chol makom asher tir'eh. Be forewarned, okay, be careful not to offer your sacrifices any place you want. Ki'im b'makom asher yivchar Hashem, but the place that God chose, etc. Okay, where the Beit HaMikdash should be, or the Mishkan. Okay. So what do they say here? V'chihad amar Ravin, amar Rabbi Elazar, kol makom shneimar hishamer pen ve'al, wherever it says hishamer pen or al, is eino ela lo taseh. Okay, a lo taseh doesn't have to be don't do this. It could be hishamer lecha pen ta'aseh. Okay, be careful not to do this. That's a lo taseh according to Rabbi Avin. So there's a lo taseh. So a lo taseh is in a different section, but it says exactly what we're looking for, which is don't offer your sacrifices outside of the temple. Okay, that's fine. Right? We have many cases. If you remember the Arayot, there's chapter 18 and there's chapter 20. Right? One is the warnings: don't sleep with this, don't sleep, and the other is if you do this, you will get this punishment. They're not always together. Okay, but now comes our big question, which is going to take us through till tomorrow. Ela shchita, but what about slaughtering? Bishlama onesh, okay, onesh we got. Dichtiv, again, very similar pasuk to the other one. El petach ol moed lo avio. If you didn't bring it to petach ol moed, okay, then you will get karet. So we got the punishment. Ela azhara minayin. Where do we get the azhara from? So the first answer, we're going to have 4 answers, 3 today, 1 tomorrow. The first 2 we're going to reject. The first one it's going to take us a while to reject. Okay, so. Okay, that pasuk I mentioned, it's very confusing, right? It's not clear what it's trying. They say, don't slaughter your animals outside, is the way they read this. So they say, what do you mean? How could you understand the pasuk this way? Don't you need that for what Rabbi Elazar says? Rabbi Elazar. Okay, if you remember Avodah Zarah, or if you learned it, you might remember. Markulis was a god that they would throw stones at to worship. Okay? Now, what if you worship it in a way that other gods get worshipped that way, by offering an animal sacrifice, but that's not the way people worship Markulis. That's what we call Shalo Kedarka. You're worshiping this Avodah Zarah, not in its typical way. So how do you know that you're chayav? Dechtiv lo yizbechu od etzivchehem. From our pasuk, you're going to learn that because it says, "Don't slaughter to the gods." Because remember, the seirim are gods. Okay, even though seirim means goats, there was also gods called seirim. In a bunch of places in the Torah, they're referring to as idols. Now, how do you get it from here? Well, now it can't be talking about don't slaughter animals when that's the normal, typical way to worship that god, because there's already another pasuk, dichtiv, echa yavdu. And in that pasuk it says, upen tidrosh, remember pen we said is already a lo taseh, lest you go to your God saying, how will we worship the God? How do these, it's echa yavdu agoyim ha'ele et Elohem. Like, don't go out and try to figure out how do these people worship their gods, and seken gamani, and I will do that. Okay, this is the warning. We get into the land, don't start learning from their actions. Now that pasuk is clearly talking about, I want to learn how they worship, and I will do it. And it's saying, don't do that. So we already have a pasuk saying you can't do that, and therefore we have a classic imeno inyan. If this pasuk can't be saying the same thing as that pasuk, so it must be talking about something else, but similar but different. So Tanei on the Shalo Kedarka. So that pasuk must be teaching us, Lo Yizbechu is you can't even offer a sacrifice to a god, even if that's not the typical way that anybody worships. And therefore, that pasuk is needed for that. How could you say it's the warning pasuk for slaughtering outside? To which Rabbi has an answer. That's not the strongest answer, but anyway, we're going to come up with a different reason to reject this. Rabbi, karebe lo yizbechu, vekarebe velo od. Okay, the pasuk says, velo yizbechu od, perhaps because of the vav, we can connect it to the section before and connect it to the section after. Meaning, velo yizbechu means, and don't slaughter your animals outside. Because remember, yizbechu really means slaughter in the Torah. Don't slaughter your animals outside. And also, because it says velo yizbechu od, the od is, and additionally, there's a prohibition to slaughter animals for idols. So in that one phrase, we get two negative commandments, which is a little, sometimes you have that kind of thing, but it's a little bit of a stretch. But anyway, the Gemara is going to reject it no matter what, because it's going to say, akate mebayale l'chititanya. We actually need it for a different braita. Okay, so even if you somehow answer that could be explaining these two things, in the end, there's something else we learn from here. Now, this is going to be a long braita, so just remember, this is all parenthetical, even though it's going to be very similar. What this is going to do is, and I kind of mentioned it before, that before we said there's two sections. Hashochet, which goes from Aleph to Pasuk Zayin. Then starting from Chet, it starts Ha'ala. This is going to suggest, this Braita, that there's two sections within the first section. There's Pasuk Aleph to Daled. And then when we got to that weird Pasuk, L'man asher yaviu Yisrael tzivchayim asher yim zochim al pnei hasadeh, it's actually talking about a different case within Shlutei Chutz. They're going to split into two cases. They're going to say, the main case that we start with, where there's karet, is the case where, what we talked about, you designated an animal to sacrifice, and you can't do it outside. You designated a time where there was already the prohibition to sacrifice outside the temple, and then you slaughtered it outside. But another case could be a kind of rare case, but they're going to say the second section is talking about a case where I designated an animal for sacrifice before it was even forbidden, meaning before the temple was built or in use, where I could still sacrifice it outside. But by the time I went to sacrifice it, there was already a temple and I couldn't. And what they're going to say is, it's also forbidden just the same. Okay, well, not just the same, actually. It's also forbidden, but you're not going to get karet for it, because in those few psukim, hey to zayin, there's no karet mentioned. It's just going to be forbidden. We're going to see there's an aseh and a lo taseh. So you're not doing if you do it outside, you're not fulfilling a positive commandment of bringing it to God, and you're also transgressing a negative commandment. And what this braita is going to do, just so you understand, is going to set up where's the warning pasuk for that, and where's the punishment. Okay, there really is no punishment. We're going to see. But okay, let's read. Adkan, okay, here's the braita. And basically we're going to use is that pasuk for lo yizbechu is not going to be coming for Shlutei Chutz in a regular case. It's only in that weird case where I designate it when it was still permitted, and only after, right? And there's no karet with it. So we can't then use it for our purposes. That's the main idea. Adkan hu medaber b'kodshim shekdisham b'shadi sur b'mot, v'ikrivan b'shadi sur b'mot. So if the braita starts off and says exactly what I just said, which is, Until this point, meaning until Pasuk K, it's talking about I designated when the bama were forbidden, and then I offered it when I slaughtered it when the bama were forbidden, turning now to Amabed. Sharei on Shama more, and their punishment is clear. A petach ol moed. Okay, that's clear. A petach ol moed, lo evio, and you get karet. Azhara, where's the warning? Okay, now we're going to see a different pasuk. It's a very strange pasuk. They say the warning for shchita outside, in a regular, typical case, is actually from the warning of offering it on the altar outside, which is very strange. That's the pasuk from Devarim, okay, that we saw before. We're going to put this issue aside. We're going to see this at the very, very end of today's stuff, okay? Because I'll tell you already now, just so you get it, which is they're going to make a gezeira shava between the two. So once you make a gezeira shava, that's really the pasuk, and from there we're going to learn to our case. So we're going to learn it through gezeira shava, but let's just leave that aside for now because that's not why we brought this. What we brought this for is the continuation because we want to see that lo yizbachu is not free for what we thought it was free for. Right? We can't use it for our warning pasuk for the shochet bachutz. Mikam va'elach, from pasuk hey and on, bezvachim shekdishan b'shat heter bamot, ikrivan b'shat isur bamot, exactly what I explained. You designated it when the bamot were still permitted, but when you offered it and then slaughtered it, it was already forbidden. Shenemal, how do we know that that's what these pasukim are talking about? And I mentioned the pasukim are strange, right? Now, what's this? Their sacrifices that they sacrifice or that they slaughter. What is all that meant to say? Zevachim she'itarti l'cha kfal. So they say, what does this mean? God is saying, these are zevachim that I already permitted to you because at the time you designated them, they were permitted to bring outside. Al pinei hasadeh. Now, why does it say? Okay, now, when you bring offerings in the field, what does that mean? Well, that usually sounds like avodah zarah. That's what people did. They just did it, right? If you remember, they say, get rid of all the gods that are under every tree, and when you get to the land, they're all over. Lomar lecha teaches you, hazovech b'shad isur bamot, if you slaughter in the time of isur bamot, even if it was designated before when it was permitted, and now you slaughter it when it's forbidden, it's as if you offered idols, basically. Okay? So that's the first pasuk. So the first pasuk sets up that what we're talking about is this unique case. Okay? Again, it's a drasha. It's definitely not clear from the pshat, where it was you designated at the time when it was all permitted, and you only offered it, and you slaughtered it once it was forbidden. Then, so what's the issue here? What do we have? I told you already, there's a mitzvah taseh and a mitzvah lo taseh. Vehevi'um lashem. So it says you have to bring them to God. That's mitzvah taseh. Lo ta'aseh minayin. So where's the lo ta'aseh? Talmud lamar v'lo yizbechu od. So now we see the lo yizbechu is actually the warning for that unique case. Therefore, it can't teach you about a regular case of shchutei chutz. This is exactly why we brought this braita, because it's actually teaching you about this unique case where even when I do it when I designated it, when it was actually permitted to bring it outside, still, if I slaughter it outside once there's a temple and it's forbidden, I'm going to transgress a negative prohibition. Now, I'm not going to get karet, because remember, there's no karet in those psukim. Yachol yeheh anush karet. You might have thought I get karet, but no. Talmud Lamal, how did it end? Chukat olam tiyeh zot lachem ledorotechem. Now, there's something strange about this pasuk. Usually it says chukat olam ledorotechem, right? This says chukat olam tiyeh zot. This will be for you. So zot lahem v'lo acheret lahem. What it's trying to tell you is this is what there is. There's a negative. There's a positive commandment that you're not fulfilling, that you're supposed to bring it to God, and there's a negative prohibition that you're transgressing, which is don't bring it to lo yizbechu od etzivcheihem, right? L'siyirim. Don't bring them outside. Okay, but there's no karet. Okay, so that's the second section. We're done with it now. I'm sorry, that's the end of the first section. We said lo yizbechu. We thought was the warning. Now we see, even if you could somehow answer the first question and say, well, isn't it talking about idol worship and the markulis that you do in not the right manner? To which you said, well, maybe you could learn two things from it. But even if you can learn two things from it and say the below is connecting it also to the previous section, well, the previous section is actually talking not about our case, because it's within those few psukim that actually veer off and talk about this weird case of you designate b'shat heter bamot and then it was already forbidden later, by the time you slaughtered it. Okay, option 2. Ella Amar Rabbi Avin, and the Bach changes it to Abaye, okay, but whoever said it, Kal v'chomer. we're going to learn a warning from a kal v'chomer. Don't worry if you know that there's a problem with that, because we've learned it before, but we're going to get to that only at the end today. Uma bimkom, what's the kal v'chomer? No, the kal v'chomer is based on the braita we just learned right now. Uma bimkom shelo anash is here. Now, if you compare the cases, when it's completely forbidden, both when you designated it and when you slaughtered it, which is our case, versus the case where it was only forbidden when you slaughtered it, not when you designated it, where there's no karet there. So if there's a place where shelo anash, there's no punishment of karet, and therefore no chatat offering that you have to bring, he's here, and yet there's a warning, v'lo yizbechu od, right? V'lo yizbechu od, makom she'anash, in our case, where there's clearly a punishment, eino din, he's here. Wouldn't it be obvious that you could learn from there that obviously, if it's isur bamot, right, from the beginning, of course it's going to be forbidden, and there's a lo taseh. So you can just learn a warning through a kal v'chomer. So first we're going to have one slew of problems, why this would be an issue, resolve it. Then we're going to have another possible problem, resolve it. But then we're going to end with this principle that says, ein nizharim min adin, you can't learn a warning from a kal v'chomer. And that's going to completely reject this. But it's going to take us a little while to get there. Amalei Ravina le Rav Ashi. If you could use this principle and say, you don't need a warning pasuk whenever you can learn it from a kal v'chomer, then im kain lo yamer lav b'chelev v'tetiv kal v'chomer min avela. You could just say, the Torah didn't have to say, don't eat chelev. The Torah says, don't eat chelev, and it also says, if you eat chelev, you will get karet. Now, if you could say, I can learn it from a kal v'chomer, like the one we just did, then I could just say, if you eat chelev, you get karet, right? That's the forbidden fats of only domesticated animals. Remember behemot, because the chelev is what burns on the altar of them. So in regular animals, you're not allowed to eat them, and only behemot go on the altar, not chayot, which are undomesticated animals. So it's prohibition just for domesticated animals. You'll see why I'm prefacing that, because we're going to get to that later. So now, if chelev gets karet, and we're going to now have a whole slew of other things that don't get karet, so there's no punishment. Okay, they're just a regular lo taseh. And they have warning pasuks, don't do this, then maybe we could have learned the warning for chelev from a kal v'chomer, and the Torah didn't need to say, don't eat chelev. The fact that Torah said, don't eat chelev, must teach us that you can't learn it from a kal v'chomer. But each time we bring something, we're going to say, oh no, that has a chomer that chelev doesn't have, and therefore you couldn't have learned it by a kal v'chomer. Because kal v'chomer means, right, there's something light, and then something more severe. If it's true for the light, it's true for the severe. But if the light one also has a severity to it, then you can't learn it. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go through a whole list of things. So first, they want to say, let's learn it from nevela, which is a dead animal, which you're not allowed to eat, but there's no karet associated with it. You don't have to bring a korban chatat. But man nevela, shelo anash is here. So in nevela, there's no punishment, and yet there's a negative, don't eat nevela. Chelev sha'anash, enodin, she's here. So there's the logic. You should just say chelev, where there is a punishment, right? And obviously, then there must be an azhara. And we don't do that, so it must be not the case. Well, until the Kamei Rabbi, they got before Rabbi, when Ravina said this to Rav Ashi, got before Rabbi, Amrle, mi nevela lo ati, you can't, because nevela has a chumrah. What's the chumrah of nevela? Ikal mifrach, mala nevela shekem etamei. A dead carcass carries on impurity, passes on impurity, whereas chelev doesn't pass on any impurity, so it's got a chumrah. Okay, let's move to the next one. Shratzim tmeim, the shmona shratzim that are tmeim that you can't eat. Mala shratzim tmeim shemitamim b'mashu. They're also mitame. Okay, the mashu is not so important here. It seems like it's even a mistake. So it says somewhere that word's a mistake. I'm going to take it out. Shratzim also, those 8 shratzim carry impurity with them. So that's why they're more chamor than chelev. Okay, how about shratzim torim? All kinds of creatures that we can't eat. Bugs, right? Crickets, things like that. Okay? Actually, crickets, I'm not going to get into those, but whatever. Shratzim torim, creatures that you can't eat, that also don't pass impurity. They're not one of the 8. Malish shratzim torim shisuram b'mashu. No, shratzim torim, they're forbidden, actually not mashu, but an adasha, the size of a lentil. Chelev is only forbidden, the size of a kesayit. So again, it has a chumrah. May orla v'kilei kerem, right, the fruits the first 3 years on the tree, and the mixed, right, the vineyard that grows with the grains. Mala orla, okay, which also, there's no punishment of karet, and there's a warning, don't eat them. So you could have learned it from a kal v'chomer to chelev. No, they're forbidden to benefit from. Chelev, you can benefit, you can sell it, okay, you just can't eat it. Okay, mishvi, okay, shmita. No, because if you sell shmita produce, the money moves on to, the sanctity moves on to the money. You don't have such a thing with chelev. Okay, so again, it has chumrah. Mitruma. Okay, why not truma? Truma, again, it's forbidden. There's no karet, no chatat, and yet there's a warning, don't eat truma if you're a non-kohen. Well, shekain lo hutar bichlala. But there's no heter at all for it. This is why I told you about the chelev and the chaya. Chelev can be eaten on an undomesticated animal, just not on a domesticated animal. So it has some sort of heter to it, which doesn't exist by truma. So now they say, once you get to that, you could say the same thing for all of them. You could knock them all out, even though we knock them out for other reasons. All those other things. They're never permitted. All those things are never permitted. And chelev is sometimes permitted if it's on domesticated animals. So with that, Rava answers all the questions, and some of them double. Okay? But Rava says, listen, but if you really want to ask a question, I got a question. Haditnan Pesach umila. Pesach and Milah are always unique. Why? Because there are two mitzvot aseh. The only two mitzvot aseh you get karet for. Now, we always assume they're mitzvot aseh. But comes Rava and he says, but listen, Pesach and Milah, it says karet. They have a punishment of karet. If you don't do Pesach, you don't do a Brit Milah. They're mitzvot aseh. But teiti b'kavachomer mi motir. Motir is notar. Now, notar is don't leave it over till the morning, the meat, right? And if you leave it over, now, you don't get karet for notar if you leave it over. So ma motir shelo anash is here, but it says lo totiru, don't leave it over. So Pesach u'milah sha'anash, so Pesach and Milah which have karet, ein odin, she is here. So maybe they should be a lo taseh. Now what's the relevance? Well, Pesach and Milah you get karet for, but you don't break a korban chatat. But if we say there's a lo taseh associated with it, then you bring a korban chatat if you missed the korban Pesach or you missed your Brit Milah. Now Tosafot says very smartly, why does he use notar specifically? Because if you don't do the korban Pesach, you don't do Brit Milah, or you leave over your meat, they're all three similar in the sense that you haven't done an action. Most lotas says you do an action. I ate the chelev. But this, notar, is a lack of action, right? You didn't do an action, and with that you transgress something. Same thing with Pesach, same thing with Brit Milah. You didn't do it, you transgress by not doing it. So he says, theoretically, you should learn, notar says, no, don't do it. Maybe you mean, also by Pesach and also by Brit Milah, don't not do it on the 8th day. Don't not do it on, right? Don't miss Pesach. Okay, and maybe we can learn a lo taseh from a kavachomer. We don't. So there's your proof. There's no kavachomer here to learn warnings. But Rav Ashi says, no, I have an answer for that. Amrita l'shmata k'meita Rav Kahana. I said this before Rav Kahana, and he said, Mimotir lo atyan. Di'ika l'mifrach ma l'motir shken ein lo takana. You can't fix notar. Once you leave it beyond the given time, you've ruined it. Whereas Pesach, and also Brit Milah, by the way, yesh lo takana. You can always, Pesach, you could do it at Pesach Sheni. Brit Milah, you can do later. So, that's why. To which the Gemara says, Bechimas, here in Minadin, but here's the real, and I already told you this before, there's no such thing as learning a warning from a kavachomer. Din is a kavachomer from logic. Afilu laman damar on shiminadin, there's a big machloket. Can you learn a punishment by a kavachomer? But even to the ones who say you can learn a punishment, ein nisarim minadin, nobody thinks you could learn a warning from a kavachomer. Rejected option 2. Option 3. Ela kid Rabbi Yochanan, but this will finish. Ta'amar atya hava'a. Mala, okay, if you notice, both psukim said, in shchutei chutz and halat chutz, if you don't bring it to, right, you have to bring it to the Beit HaMikdash, al petach omoed lo yivi'enu, or al petach omoed lo yivi'o, same language is used. Mala halan lo anash elim kin is here, afkan lo anash elim kin is here, and that explains the bright at the top of Amud Bet. The warning pasuk, according to this explanation, is actually the warning pasuk for hala'ah. Hishamer lecha pen ta'aleo lotecha. Since hala'ah has an azhara, we learn through gezeira shava to the other. Why is that okay and not learning it for the kavachomer? Because if you remember, gezeira shava, first of all, unless you learned it from your rabbi, you can't do it. Kavachomer you can make up on your own. So kavachomer has much less strength than gezeira shava, and therefore you can learn it through gezeira shava. Okay, we'll end here. We have one more answer tomorrow. That's on tomorrow's daf. What did we do today? Very briefly, we started with Rabbi Shimon. What does he do with that michutz l'machaneh that we darshan yesterday? That as soon as you leave one machaneh, you're tameh. We said he learns the gezeira shava to para aduma, and we learned things both directions. Okay, then we got to where's the end game, right? And what are the different opinions about where in Jerusalem we do it? The burning of the bulls and the goats, and then until what point? From what point to what point are they impure? And we saw the different opinions. Then we got to the shalchei pachutz and halab pachutz. We saw machlok Rabbi Yosei HaGelili and the rabbis. What if it's if you did both? Are you liable for both, or is it already disqualified, so the second action isn't really significant? Super interesting machloken in terms of, what that means to do something that's already been disqualified. Is that also bad? Like two wrongs don't make a right, I don't know. But and then we got to the whole question of where's the warning. The real question was, where's the warning pasuk for shochet b'chutz? And for that, we had 3 answers, and we're going to have a 4th tomorrow, and the first 2 we rejected, and we're left with this one. With that, we finish for today, wishing everyone a good day.